learning English, improving your English fluency has never been as simple as finding the right app or tool, or even watching the right video. To really improve, you need to practice, make mistakes, get feedback, and stay consistent. And technology can help with that. Apps and tools. AI can help with that. But those things don't replace the parts of learning that have always mattered, that will always matter. I'm going to be talking about these things and more with Russell Stannard. He's my guest for today. Russell is an English language teacher, an educational technology expert, and a former principal teaching fellow at the University of Westminster. In this podcast, we talk about using AI, how to learn on your own, traditional tools, which ones are worth using and not worth using, how best to get feedback when you're practicing, and what the future of English learning looks like. If you enjoy the conversation, make sure to like and subscribe and check out the 90-day program in the link in the description. With all of the tools that I think we both talk about and think about a lot, especially AI tools for learners, where does the teacher sit in terms of the value that they bring to the learning experience?
I think it's a really good question, and I think we're kind of struggling a little bit with that. But I think what you've got to try and do as a teacher is to look at terms of what the students may be able to do on their own, and therefore say, well, for example, now these days they can do a lot more listening material on their own. They can expose themselves to language a lot more than they used to be able to. So we don't need to do a lot of listening material in the class because the students can do that more. But what we can therefore do is perhaps spend more time on speaking and getting the students to actually communicate and work together. So to make the most of that. So I think what we've got to kind of do is shift a little bit, look at what the AI can provide, and hopefully the students will do some of that work outside. Of course, that's a question in itself. And then try to make better use of the classroom time, I think, for actually practicing using and processing the language rather than the language being taught to you.
Do you believe that teachers should be the one directing progress? In other words, saying where to go, or do you think there's a role for AI there too?
There is a role there, definitely, Luke. But I do actually, it's really interesting again that what you're asking. So I make a big point in my, excuse me, in my videos of talking about where I believe AI is having the biggest impact is on what students can do outside the classroom. We talk about extramural learning or independent learning, yeah? And so what I tried to say to the teachers is that is a big responsibility of yours now to be aware of some of the key tools and how the students could use them. Because if you imagine you're in class and maybe you've got your students for 2 hours a week, but your students could be outside of the class and listening to YouTube videos when they're on the bus or on the train or even at home, or listening to podcasts or doing activities on Wordwall. In theory, if they're motivated, of course, you know there are many learning opportunities that didn't exist before. So I do think one part of what a teacher needs to do is to be aware of some of the key tools. We can't keep up with all of them, but be aware of some of the key tools and make sure that you pass that knowledge on to the students, because students are not necessarily as good with technology as we think they are. They might be good at using their phones for a certain thing, because they check Instagram or whatever. But if you was to ask a student, well, how do you use the internet for learning languages? Well, a lot of them wouldn't know. So I do think that that's a big part of our role now. And on a lot of the courses that I run, the bigger courses that I do, say for 2 weeks or 6-week online courses with me, I do a lot of work around the types of tools that we can pass on to our students so that they can make better use of their time outside of the classroom.
The one, I agree with you, but the one problem I see there is it's very one way. So if I recommend 5 things, even if they use those 5 things, it's still a black box. And anything I get back is just a student reporting like what they did or didn't do. And that's as a teacher, I think sometimes, I hope you're using these tools, but I really can't see or know much about what's going on really. And it can be a pain point as a teacher, I find.
if you're going to introduce, let's say you're going to encourage your students to use Quizlet or Wordwall, okay, you've got to bring it into the class first. You've got to
Yeah.
actually be working with that tool first and show the students how to use that tool, and hope that you're planting a seed, because they say, wow, God, that's really useful. I'm going to use that outside in my learning. Because I made that mistake at the beginning, when the internet first started. I'm talking about now, sort of like 2000, and we began to use the internet more and more for language learning. We were aware of websites, and then obviously with Web 2.0 in sort of 2007, sharing loads and loads of links on my courses to students, say, look, you could use this, you could use that.
Yeah.
Whenever I actually went on and looked, no one had ever clicked on those links. I've really learned now that if you're gonna, because empowering students is really important, and if you're ever going to do that, you have got to bring that into the class.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And by doing that, you also you can more easily complete the loop, but also habituate them in a controlled situation. Well, speaking specifically of the learner experience, let's say using tools to improve overall fluency or listening or whatever they're doing with it, what are some of the, with the AI tools that you recommend, what are some of the big mistakes that you see learners making when it comes to using even common tools like ChatGPT or the basics?
I don't know, obviously, what your belief is about language, and I'm sure you speak multiple languages, but I'm very much of the sort of Krashen idea of language exposure and of being exposed to language. And I think, some of the things that I would say that I believe students make mistakes about, they focus too much on grammar. Now, I'm not saying that you don't need to learn some grammar, and I think you've got to kind of decide at certain points, like, I need to clarify this, I don't understand this. So I'm currently studying Polish, and there is just sometimes I've got to go on to Gemini and just say, listen, I'm really struggling with the accusative case in Polish. Can you explain it to me at level B1? But, language exposure is, in my opinion, the most important thing. And when I'm learning Polish, and I'm slowly getting there, Luke, I'm beginning now because it's a tough language, it's just about language exposure. It's about listening and studying the vocabulary, and then studying that vocabulary, and then going back and listening to that same video again and reworking it and getting more and more familiar with it, and then maybe taking that technology, that YouTube video that you say you've been studying, and put it into Google Gemini and say, right, can you summarize that or make a story out of it for me? So then I'm kind of reworking and using the language that I'm learning more and more and more, rather than, number one, jumping all over the place. Try to keep it all focused around a key thing. For example, over the World Cup, the period of the World Cup, I've been just purely and utterly focusing on that, watching YouTube videos in Polish about the World Cup, studying vocabulary connected to that, and then generating stories in Google Gemini storybooks based on football using the vocabulary, so that it's kind of all linked together. So what learners often do is that they kind of jump around all over the place. They're not necessarily keeping it all focused into one area. And I think the other thing is, I know that you are also a language speaker, so you know as much as I do. It's about frequency. You've got to be studying. I mean, I honestly study Polish literally every day. And I might only do 15, 20 minutes some days, and other days I'm really motivated and I'll do an hour or so. But I think being consistent is really, really important. Yeah, I think, and also I think another thing is, and again, I presume you probably feel the same. It's great when you learn a language, and once you get into it, obviously at the beginning it's really difficult. You've got to look for videos at very low level on YouTube, for example, study the vocabulary, and it's a little bit frustrating, and you're learning I have and I am and I can. But as you expand, begin to, you couldn't do this before, focus on things that you're interested in. So I like football. And so for me, for example, it's been really interesting these last month, saying, okay, I'm going to dedicate the time to learning about Polish vocabulary, phrases on football, and keep repeating and working with it and doing different things with it. So I think what students do badly sometimes, they jump all over the place, don't kind of connect it all together.
Yeah, I think, I agree. I think that's a valuable role, and helping you even find how to connect those interests to the language that you're trying to get. It is something that a teacher can do. One thing that I see pretty often is just assuming that learning language is learning vocabulary or something like that. And that's
Yeah,
because
yeah.
it's easy and comfortable. And that's because, well, specifically with English learning, often non-native English speakers will have learned English in school, and so they have an unconscious association where they associate language learning, English learning specifically, with academic learning.
One of the things obviously I've had a long teaching career, and in that time, I was a bit of a disastrous language learner, certainly a disastrous language learner at the beginning. So I decided to become an English teacher. I didn't really speak any other languages at the time, so I've kind of gone through this thing of and so I've read a lot about how the language acquisition. And a couple of really useful things that I picked up, and I remember one of the first ones was the studies about reading. Now, we always treat reading as kind of academic text, picking out
Yep.
the vocabulary. Really, what you want to do with reading is read a lot, if you can, read 15, 20 minutes a day, but really actually below your level. Okay. Paul Nation, who's a big kind of linguist, he often talks about you need to be reading a text that you understand between 95 and 98% of the text. So what you're doing is you're reading, and it's language that you're already familiar with, but you're processing it more and more and more and more and more. And if there are a few words that you don't understand, because you understand so much of the text, you probably could guess those words. Now, I remember reading that and I thought, I wonder if that's true. And I actually learned French. A big part of my learning of French was that way. I just bought loads and loads of readers and I read them. And I always bought the readers below my level. Luke, that really, really helped me. And now you can go onto the internet and go onto Google Gemini and choose Google Storybooks and tell it, can you write me a story in Polish at level B1 on the topic of football? Can we include this vocabulary? Bang! And I've got myself a story with the pictures, with the audio as well. And then I
Yeah.
can listen to it. It's just remarkable.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think reading has a really important role, and it's one of those things that gets a negative stigma among learners because us reading, I had to do that when I was in eighth grade, or something like that.
No, you're
And
right.
then
You're
it's
right.
hard, but you're right. You're reading at a level that where you can understand most of what you're reading, especially if it's something you're interested in, can be really powerful. And people who read see the biggest benefits. I've noticed people who are because they're genuinely curious and they do it every day and they make it a habit.
Yeah, I
Um,
mean,
yeah.
I think that's why I like the Google Gemini storybooks, because it's got the audio. So if I'm not a big reader naturally, it's not a thing that I only do it because I know it's good for my language learning. But what is really nice is that I can now read and listen at the same time.
Right.
When I was learning French, I had to. I'm talking about quite a long time ago. I had to buy cassettes to go along with the readers. Oh, it costed quite a lot of money as well. So you buy a little reader in French, story at level A2, B1, whatever, and you buy the cassette along with it. That was quite a lot of money in those days, and now I can do all that for free. It's just incredible.
Yeah, it's hard to notice things changing from day to day, but if you look back these days, if you look back 3 months,
No, you're right,
everything's
God.
changing all the time.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. I talk a lot about the role of mistakes. And the reason I talk about the role of mistakes is because I think that it's such an interesting thing where you do want to reduce mistakes as a learner. However, you don't want to fear mistakes. And mistakes are a wonderful thing because if you learn to catch them yourself, then you can learn much faster. And so the more you make and the more you can catch, the better. At the same time, you do want to reduce them. So there's a really interesting kind of tension there. I wonder
yeah.
if you have what your view on mistakes is as part of the learning process, separate from what maybe with AI or not.
So I think number one, yes. I think mistakes are really useful. Of course, you need someone to point the mistakes out to you. You need to be aware that you're making mistakes. I think we came back to the issue of kind of language exposure. In the 1970s, there was a big kind of group of studies that looked at what good language learners do. I remember one of the early ones was a study by Joan Rubens, and she looked at what students in good language learners did in class. She observed classes. And one of the things that she found out was that good language learners focus on language, they listen carefully. They listen and focus on the form of the language. Now, again, it's one of those things that you read and you think, yeah, I'm going to start doing that.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And okay, and it's kind of something that I didn't do before. And you know what? Because I just said, we were talking earlier, I've kind of gone back a lot to these studies recently, and I've been refreshing all the stuff I've read. And I've thought to myself, yeah, I don't do that enough in Polish. And recently I've really been doing that, listening carefully just to what I'm hearing around me, just paying a bit more attention. And I think that can be really useful in terms of just making sure that you are focusing on form as well as on meaning, so that you're listening carefully. I think the other thing you've got to do, and this, you probably know more about this than I do in a way, but you've identified a mistake, or you kind of got a feeling you don't know something. Yeah, really can be good if you go onto Google Gemini, and I'm sure ChatGPT's got the same thing, and you go to what's called guided learning. Okay.
Yeah.
And the guided learning is quite good because it's almost sort of trying to be a teacher for you.
Well,
So you sort of say
tutor oriented. It's very step by step, back and
it's
forth.
like they call it the Socratic method, don't they? Because they ask you questions, all right? So you go on there and you kind of almost literally have to start like that. You say, look, I'm really struggling with the past perfect in English, and I never quite know in what context I need to use it. Can you give me some examples at B1? And then it will start to give you some examples, and then it might say, right, do you want me to make an interactive quiz to see if you can follow this? Or it might say to you, right, if I was in this situation, which would be the correct sentence? And then you're kind of working with the system. Now, I've been a bit surprised how useful this is in Polish, because funny enough, the Google Gemini
works in
does a
Polish
really good job.
too, yeah.
Yeah, really well. I've asked my wife to look at the stuff and say, no, it's really accurate. So, which is surprises me because it's pretty complicated language, Polish. But I do find that helpful, and it's the guided learning. I think it must exist, Luke, in ChatGPT as well. No,
I think so. Yeah, I think, and Grok may have it as well.
Right.
Yeah. I think one thing you said really struck me, paying attention to form, over meaning. And I think that's so important, even for things like pronunciation. I'm maybe controversially, I don't know if it's even okay to say, but I hate phonetic symbols. And when students ask me if they should use them, I generally recommend that they don't. And the reason for that is simple, is the ones who I find, the students who are really good at speaking naturally and have really natural pronunciation, are the ones who just use their ears as their main input device. Because when you create a thing in the middle, which is the symbol, then you're learning the symbol, not the sound. But if you just say, what is this sound? Because most English speakers will say, I don't know, what do you mean? That doesn't sound like any of the words that it is. The sentence, what do you mean? That doesn't, and yet a native speaker will be able to say that and understand it totally easily and break the meaning out as needed. But it doesn't sound anything like that. So that's the form. That's the form of that. And if you can figure out the form of that, just listen and pay attention and you'll get it. You'll start to pick it up.
So linguists talk. I absolutely agree with you. Totally agree. I'm not keen on the phonetics symbols or using them in my teaching these days. In fact, I don't teach anymore. I teach teachers these days. But
right.
towards it now, when I first
you've ascended.
When I first started teaching, I did do that. We call that kind of. You've got two ways of looking at it. We can call it sort of top-down processing or bottom-up, or we can talk about what we call the prosodic features. It's really interesting. The prosodic features of a language, right? So what it means is that there are kind of tendencies in a language that mean you can often sort of identify, even if I spoke to you in English with a French accent, I speak a French accent, but I am speaking in English. So how is it possible that I can do that? Well, that's called the prosodic features of the language. It's quite an interesting topic. I did a lot of work because I lived in Spain for 11 years. I did a lot of work when I lived in Spain. I wanted to kind of speak with an Andalus accent. That's the south of Spain.
Hmm.
And so, I used to sort of really, again, coming back to the point we're making about focusing on speakers, focusing, yeah, sort of focus on and watch what they would do with their mouth. And then I'd go home and I would practice in front of the mirror and I'd say, hombre, ¿qué pasa contigo? ¿Sabes lo que te digo? Porque yo tengo un acento así muy fuerte, hombre. Now, and I would practice literally with these prosodic features. So I wasn't identifying the individual sounds, but the overall feel of the language. Does that make sense?
That makes sense. That makes sense.
Yeah.
I'm curious if it felt like at the time you were learning it, did it felt like you were putting it on, or when you do it now, do you or others feel like, okay, you're putting on an accent, or is it, do you reach a point where it just kind of feels effortless and natural, and when others hear you, let's say natives hear you, they go, yeah, you're one of us.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's not that good anymore. I lived outside of Spain for 30 odd years, but when I lived there, I used to be able to phone up my friends and muck around and say, "Hombre, qué pasa? Soy yo, Pepe," and they wouldn't actually understand who it was. They wouldn't say, "Listen," and then I say, "Oh no, it's me, it's Russell." So they really couldn't recognise my accent in those days. Now they could. So yeah, I mean, I do think that when you speak another language, you kind of do take on another person. I accept what you're saying. No, I wouldn't try to speak in Spanish and say, "Hombre, qué pasa contigo?" I don't speak like that, But the fact that I've focused so much on it that I can actually kind of emulate that accent to that degree. I think that's the point I'm making. Coming back to what you're saying, we were both saying, focusing on speakers, really paying attention to learners in terms of what they're saying, how they're pronouncing, and even their mannerisms. I think that's also really important.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. I mean, it's like a comedian who's really good at doing accents or really good at even making animal noises. There's a different skill that's being accessed there that is actually, learners can learn something from how they're doing that, I think, right?
Yeah.
It's not about just learning what they're saying and the meaning of what they're saying, but it's about pay attention and kind of ignore meaning. Ignore a lot of the things you normally pay attention to. Just focus on what sounds are coming out, what you see, all the mannerisms. Yeah, I agree. Well, I wanted to maybe slightly get back into the tech side of it. So I think that's something we're both pretty keen on. But what are the things that you're excited about coming up, maybe, as possibilities around language learning in general? Whether that's AI or tech, anything around tech that you're really excited about that maybe is not quite here yet.
I guess it is the ability to speak to your computer. I think that's a sort of often, and I mean, we know it's coming. The chatbots are getting better and better and better. There are now, I think it's something, again, that you might know more about than I do, but I've certainly experimented with chatbots. And I tell you what, there's a couple of things that I've been quite impressed with. Sometimes the fact, even though they're not totally realistic, you speak and then it speaks back to you, or you speak and it gives you a little bit of feedback, or it kind of, but often when you're practicing speaking, especially in the language you don't know very well, you need that extra time. Sometimes actually, I'm living in Poland at the moment, right? So when I'm here and I'm out on the streets and I'm having to speak in Polish, and I'm under pressure to generate the language really instantaneously. Obviously, if you're working with a chatbot, you've got, you're in a conversation, you're having a chat, but you're not under so much pressure. You can take your time about replying to the question that they've given you. So it's definitely not like speaking to a human being, speaking to another person, but it's not bad and it can help you. And I have actually used, and I've used them to practice my French mainly, but also a bit of my Spanish as well. And I've been pretty impressed. So I think, that those tools have got great potential. I think you probably know more about that than I do.
So you did mention one interesting thing. You said it doesn't quite have the pressure of a real conversation being in the moment. How much of the role of learning language, or let me say it differently. When you're learning a language, when you're learning to speak a language naturally, how much of it is that ability to handle a real social situation? I guess how far does an AI chat where you can take as long as you need get you if that's the treadmill, right,
I
of
understand what you're saying. Yeah,
practice?
really interesting. I mean, okay, so I'm going through this experience a bit by living here in Poland at the moment, and to be honest with you, sometimes, sometimes we get together in family. It's getting much better now, but we get together in family gatherings, and I'll be sitting there, and the language would be flying around like that, and we're sitting all in a big group, and actually. I'm very nervous to speak in Polish because there's maybe 4 or 5 people or 10 people sitting around the table. So immediately actually often those situations can be quite counterproductive.
Hmm.
Because I often walk away from that. Let's say I've been out with my family and we're all sitting around, and I walk away from that thinking, "Oh God, I'm not getting anywhere in my Polish. I wasn't really able to kind of engaged in a
Confidence, yeah.
conversation." So sometimes, actually, that real pressure situation, I think it can actually be counterproductive. I've certainly experienced that in Poland.
Wow.
So the tools in that way can be quite good as a building block. But I totally agree with you. Of course, ultimately, you've got to deal with that situation. But if it scaffolds you and helps you, now we're bringing in a bit more theory here, Vygotsky, if it scaffolds you to get to that point, I think it can be really, really helpful.
That's a really interesting point you made there. I hadn't thought about those sorts of situations being possibly counterproductive for the effect that they can have on confidence. I mean, the mindset is a big part of it, so it makes perfect sense to me. Mindset is a huge part of becoming good at anything. There are people who I've talked to so many English learners who are technically so good, but they communicate effectively at a very low level. And the reason they communicate effectively at a very low level has nothing to do with their technical ability. It's all confidence. It's all the situations they're willing to enter or not enter. It's all, I'm in an environment where other people are, big quotes here, better than me. So that's all personality. That's all mindset. That's all the stuff besides technical ability.
Totally. I remember the first time I started speaking to a chatbot in Polish, and at the time I remember this would probably been a year and a half ago, maybe even longer. And I was, wow, it understands me. It did. So that was a
Right.
big, because I was
Yeah.
thinking, well, my accent's terrible, my Polish is still quite low level. No, it actually helped to build my confidence.
Yeah.
So, I still think having a teacher's great, because if you've got a teacher, they're a really nice, halfway house between a chatbot and actually being in a real context where you're got to use the language. So the teacher can play a massive role, and that's why I was saying to you right at the beginning, the teachers, a key role for the teacher is developing student speaking skills. I think that is a key part. Absolutely massive. But those chatbots help. I'm definitely not against them. I really, and I guess they're going to get better and better and better.
I use the treadmill analogy. I think the treadmill is a thing that a runner will use that isn't really, let's say, running a marathon, but it still does make your legs move fast, and it still does get your heart rate up, and so it does a lot of the important things that you will need to do when you do it for real. And so, as you're calling it scaffolding, it's kind of scaffolding you up to where you need to
Definitely.
be. If it's raining today, it's better to go on the treadmill than not.
And I really agree with your point about confidence, and it's such a big thing. And you do, it's because we talked earlier on about how important it is to try to study every day. Well, if you sort of, you come out of a situation where you've been at a party and everyone's in Polish, and you struggle to communicate, wake up the next morning and you think, God, I can't be bothered. I'm not making any progress here. So confidence and that feeling of progress is really, really important. And I think those chatbots can give you that.
Yeah. Well, I want to give you one scenario, sort of as a point to wrap up on and get your thoughts on it. So I'm just trying to figure out where things are going. I really just want to see, if we're headed for a dystopia where everybody just talks to AIs. I hope not, and I don't think so. I think let's just focus on language learning. Language learning could become this really interesting hybrid where the real interactions happen with real people, and the real guidance and where to focus and all of that stuff happens with, let's say, a real teacher. But underneath all of that, there's an AI layer, let's say, privacy issues aside, paying attention, maybe recording, but aware of what you're talking about and what's happening and what your goals are. And then when you go away and you're on your own, you're on a walk or you just woke up and you want to practice, it knows what your goals are, what your weak areas are, what you talked about yesterday with your teacher, the awkward conversation that you had at the coffee shop where you screwed up yesterday, and it can go, all right, let's focus on these things really quick. While you're eating breakfast, it can keep you focused in those times when you're away from those real situations. So you have this ping-ponging back and forth between really high-value AI interactions that are aware of your life and your goals and real interactions with teachers and real people that kind of surface those issues that you then work on the next day.
I'm really impressed with your explanation. I mean, I've never quite thought about it in those terms, but I think that's really true. And obviously, someone like myself that does know a lot about technology and can use a lot of these tools, I would almost say to some degree, I'm already experiencing that as a learner myself, because I'm able to work on my own and do loads of things on my own and develop my language learning in not just one language as well, because I always try to keep my other languages going. And, and that as these tools evolve, what you've just described will become more and more available to more people. Because I think one point that has come out of our conversation today is at the moment, you kind of need to know a bit about how you learn a language to make good use of these AI tools. But maybe in the future, we're going to get to the point where the AI can sort of help you with that. Now, it probably can do it already if you gave it the right information, but obviously that's a big role that at the moment a teacher can play. I agree with you. I think that could, and that the way what you've described, is a perfect scenario in terms of the opportunities to learn language that 30 or 40 years ago and even 20 years ago, Luke, would have been totally and utterly non-existent. It's just incredible opportunities to learn a language and to learn it as efficiently and effectively as possible, and to focus on the things that you're interested in with that language. When I was learning Greek or study. I never really learned to speak Greek that well, but I studied Greek when I lived in Crete. And if you kind of just had to go along with what was in the book, you couldn't really focus on the things that you were interested in. Now you could be learning language, as you said, in describing it there. In the future, learning through the things that you're genuinely interested in, things that are going to be useful to you at work or in your social life. Yeah, totally agree. It's a great description.
Yeah, what the worry is just that it goes too far in the AI direction. We become isolated in bubbles, and we forego interactions because we think, why bother? Why bother? I can just talk to my AI. That's my fear. I really hope we walk the line where we can remember that human interactions are important.
Yeah, and I think that's obviously a general point way outside of just language learning, isn't it? I mean, that's something that's happening to us all in the society and in the context that we live in at the moment. I mean, that's just a general concern. I agree, totally.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having this chat with me. I really appreciate it. You gave me some really interesting perspectives. Is there anything else that you want to share with language learners who are very, let's say, tech and AI forward? Any final message you'd like to get across?
Well, make use of my YouTube channel if you want. I just make videos that show teachers and learners how to use technology, and I just try to keep them up to date with new things that are happening. And it's all practical, and I just literally try to make really clear videos where I just show people, look, this is how you do this, and this is how you could use it to learn language, and look, this is what I've been doing in Polish. You might find that pretty useful.
All right, well, I'll be sure to put the link in the description. Thanks so much, Russell. I appreciate it.
Cheers, Luke. Lovely to meet you.